Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a lovely holiday if you're watching this in real time. Otherwise, I just hope you had a lovely brief period of time in between videos. If you've never been here before, this is Broken Slippers, where we take a look at some of the less popular Disney films of the past 20 years and figure out what they can tell us about the more popular ones or how they stand on their own merits. I'm Lillian Holman. I'm your host. You can call me Lily. Today we are diving right back in, pun totally intended, into the brief world that existed after Little Mermaid, which came out in 1989, and before Beauty and the Beast, which came out in 1991. So that leaves us with 1990. Alright, well, it's tempting to believe that after Little Mermaid, they just jumped right to Beauty and the Beast, didn't look back. Happy Disney Renaissance, everyone's good. Howard Ashman is doing his thing, Alan Menken is doing his thing, it's great. Well, that isn't quite what happened. Very close, not quite. Because one film came out in between that's a bit of a holdover from 1970s Disney's, and that's what we're going to look at today. So in 1990, they released The Rescuers Down Under. Now, this is a sequel to the 1977 The Rescuers. This one is directed by Henry Butoy and Mike Gabriel, and is Disney's first major theatrical sequel if you don't count bringing characters like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy back together for different various ensemble films like Fun and Fancy Free. So it's easy to understand why it is forgotten if you look at the numbers more so than if you look at the film, because it made a paltry $28 million compared to Little Mermaid's $211 million the year before, and it's holding at a steady 68% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, if you have been to school recently, is not that great. So in fact, the only film that we've covered so far that it beat out at the box office was actually The Black Cauldron, and we've heard plenty about The Black Cauldron. So the 1977 Rescuers did do better. The first one did do better at the box office and has a better legacy on Rotten Tomatoes. But kind of like The Great Mouse Detective or Oliver and Company, you really don't see any Rescuers merch out there, or really, it's not like you can go see the characters at meet and greets in the park. It's kind of been relegated to Disney history more so than many other classics. So the sequel aspect is not one to be dismissed, but it's not also one to think of as an inherent issue. So sequels get a bad rap, and there are plenty of amazing sequels out there, so you can't really ding a film just for being the second in a series or the third in a series. But in this case, it being a sequel is a problem because it means it carries the legacy of the less successful Disney movies in its name. Rescuers wasn't big enough to be considered a Disney classic, so by doing a sequel, it's just reminding the audience of a film they didn't like as much before and continuing that legacy, especially because Little Mermaid was such a rejection of what came before it in the sense that it was so fresh and so new and really just changed the game. This was like they were taking a step backwards in the audience's eyes. So the problem I have with all of this is I actually really like The Rescuers and The Rescuers Down Under. I had not watched them until I watched them for this series, and they're incredibly charming, they're incredibly sweet, and they're kind of like the film you almost don't want to analyze or criticize or put up for awards or anything like that, because you just know your heart will be broken because you know they're not as good, but you still really like them. And that's The Rescuers and Rescuers Down Under for me. So in the end, both films tell the story of two mice, Bernard, voiced by Bob Newhart, and Miss Bianca, voiced by Eva Gabor. They are both agents of the Rescue Aid Society, possibly the most lovingly Disney creation ever conceived, which is basically the UN, but composed of mice, and whose sole job is to help those who ask for it. In Rescuers, it's a kidnapped orphan named Penny who leaves them a message in the bottle. And then in Rescuers Down Under, it's another kidnapped child named Cody, who is in Australia, hence the name. And his emergency is communicated through a series of messages, Morse code and otherwise, that are transmitted by various government agencies composed entirely of mice. It sounds really contrived, but it's a lot more fun to watch than you would think. So I like the films because the central couple is basically straight out of studio-era Hollywood rom-coms, which is just my love, my life. Bernard is pretty much Spencer Tracy with less of the anger issues that Spencer Tracy has, and Miss Bianca is Katharine Hepburn. And oh my gosh, do I love Katharine Hepburn, but Miss Bianca is Katharine Hepburn without the baggage, the pretension, and the elitism. So because of that, the film kind of plays out a lot more like the Thin Man movies, where the adventure storyline and mystery play second fiddle to the relationship of the protagonist. Thin Man stuff obviously has much wittier dialogue, much more risque dialogue, and therefore you can't beat Thin Man. You can't beat out Thin Man. But this film does try in a very admirable way. And this is a little more so in the first film than the second film. The second film, the major flaw I would find in its story structure, it has a lot of these comedic side plots that follow characters that are more like Fergie, than focusing on the central couple who's so charming. But back to the central couple, again, kind of the spirit of the films and what drives them is the kind of loving nature of the two of them. Like, Miss Bianca cannot hear the story of a child in trouble without immediately springing into action. And Bernard kind of follows her with this lovely, gentle determination. So he's going to do anything for her because he loves her, but he also cares about these kids. And so in the end, they're just two mice who care about the greater good and care about protecting kids. And so it's really hard to root against a film that centers around such a lovely, sweet idea. For me, it's best communicated in what I think is the best scene in Rescuers Down Under, which is they have met this albatross who's voiced by John Candy, kind of perfectly, who's grumpy about taking them to Australia in a snowstorm, as would be natural. But they immediately tell him that it's to save a kidnapped child, and he immediately changes his tune and gives a whole speech about that you have to help the kids, you have to take care of them, and off they go on their adventure. So, like I said, I love these films, so it comes back to the question of why did they fail? They have this charming center, they have these amazing voice talents, they have a lot of the things I have spoken about in previous blogs as being strengths of Disney films or that are missing in the weaker ones. So it's a lot of timing. It is that sandwich between Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. But it's also kind of not a fair fight, like I said, to compare the two of them, because it's not a musical and those are musicals, and that's makes it an entirely different creature. So what I found the most fruitful comparison I can make is when you compare it to something like Toy Story. So it seems a little cruel to call pitting it against Little Mermaid an unfair fight and then saying it should be compared to Toy Story and considering that a fair fight because Toy Story has become so legendary. But in the end, they actually have the same emotional core, so I think it's worth looking at why one succeeded and one didn't. Because one of my favorite animation concepts that's recurring, I hate to call it a trope, is the idea of this kind of loving, magical infrastructure that is there supporting the human world, but happening just out of sight. So people, mostly adults, and sometimes all humans, don't know what's going on, but it's there. And so one of the more distilled versions of this occurs in 2014's The Blue Umbrella, which is a genius film for so many reasons, this amongst them. And the concept is that the city itself comes to life, and you see it in a bunch of different faces. The animators have looked around and found different forms, different possible creatures throughout a city that comes to life and supports the protagonist, which is the Blue Umbrella. So that's kind of a very distilled version of this. It's not dissimilar to the Rescue Aid Society that we were just talking about at the center of the Rescuers films, which imagines that there is a society of mice out there ready to help us at every turn. But really the most famous version of this is in Toy Story, and it's this idea that our toys came to life as kids, or if we still own kids as adults, definitely not some cool people I know, that they come to life when we're out of sight, and that they also have this custodial role, that they're there to help us and take care of us, and in the case of Toy Story, kind of take on a parental role for their owner, which is Andy. So why in the end do toys beat out mice? So it comes down to priorities and perspective. So even if Bernard and Miss Bianca have the same good intentions as Woody and Buzz from Toy Story, they don't have the intense personal connection that Woody and Buzz have with Andy, with Penny and Cody. So it's a bit more like you're watching a movie from the perspective of social workers or policemen and women or agents. Like, they're there for the common good and they're there to help kids, but they're not there to adopt or parent kids. Woody and Buzz are there for Andy and Andy exclusively. They eventually get turned over to Bonnie, but for most of the series, it is for Andy. And so because of that, the major conflicts in Toy Story end up being emotional as opposed to the more active conflicts that you see in Rescuers and Rescuers Down Under. So while the Toy Story movies do have villains, they do have designated villains, they are more red herrings for the real conflict. So in the first Toy Story, Sid is the evil figure, but the real fight is Woody and Buzz, and more specifically Woody's insecurities about Buzz becoming the new favorite and therefore Andy loving him less. That evolves in Toy Story 2. He has made peace with Buzz, but now he is worried about facing time and the potential of losing Andy. And meanwhile, we have the red herring villains of Al and, forgive the spoilers, Stinky Pete. Then Toy Story 3, we have to deal with the actual loss of Andy going to college, and then you have the red herring villain of Lotso. So you have these structures that are incredibly deep and deal with time and existential crises and the people we love, comparing it to the Rescuers and the Rescuer Down Under, where the villains are, one is an evil pawn shop owner and one is a poacher, who are, their motivations are greedy. They are creepy in the sense that they have no qualms hurting or harming children to get to what they are poaching. But in the end, they're not, Bernard and Miss Bianca aren't facing these really tough issues that Woody and Buzz are. So in the end, that is the most important thing to take from the Rescuers series. So if you notice, I haven't actually pulled the movie apart too much because there aren't really scenes that stand out as especially admirable, but also you don't have scenes standing out as evidence of their failure either. So in the end, the most important thing we can get from the series is how they expose the excellence in other films that you compare them to, like The Little Mermaid and Toy Story. So Rescuers is just not about that. It's about simple mice who care about kids and fall in love. You don't need more than that for a sweet story, but you do need more than that if you are going to exist on the same playing field as people like Howard Ashman and John Lasseter. And we really can't understand the genius of these men and women working in these studios until we look at the subpar fare, but also the mediocre fare, the stuff that's going to pass but is not going to excel. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you check out these movies because they're actually really charming and fun to watch. And next week, we're going to go beyond Beauty and the Beast. We're going to go beyond Aladdin. We're going to go beyond Lion King. We're going to see what lies beyond the Pride Lands. So I hope you come back and join me. I'm having fun doing these, and so I hope you're having fun watching them. And I also hope that you have a lovely and magical week.